So, it's actually been a whole year, 3 months since the last episode of this podcast, and a lot has changed since then, including this podcast. So, I guess I need to reintroduce myself and reintroduce the podcast as well. My name is Chris, and welcome back to D3, the unofficial Digicast. No longer the unofficial Digimon podcast, the unofficial Digicast. Remember, it's unofficial because if I say official, then I'm sure Toei is going to reach out from my computer screen and copyright strike my thing. Even though this is not YouTube, Toei has been known to be very pissy when it comes to their intellectual property, so I'm going to try and be careful. I guess I should start with why I kind of left the podcast on the cutting room floor after episode 7. I was really trying to stick with the series because I really wanted to like it and I really wanted to see what it had to offer in comparison to the original series that came out in the late 90s, early 2000s, which I grew up with. But I really just could not keep up with it. After episode 7, I was just like, no, I can't keep doing this because I really had no interest in it. The pacing was really bad. The animation was hit or miss. We didn't really get much character development early on. All the kids were scattered about and they weren't together, so we really didn't see their dynamic, and the people who I really thought should have been together during those initial early episodes were not. And it seemed like the series was more leaning towards action rather than what I really liked about the original series, which was the characters and the character development and the relationships they had with their partner Digimon and with each other. It did have action, but the action was not the main focus of the show. You know what I mean? I heard mixed things about the series overall. I heard that it got better. I heard that it got worse. I don't know. Maybe later on down the line, I will try to revisit it and give it the old college try again. But as of right now, I don't think I'm going to revisit the reboot. And from what I've heard, it seems like the reboot ended on a pretty definitive note, so I don't think we're going to get an O2 reboot. If the reboot of the original was I don't think O2's reboot would be any better. And I actually really like O2. I think it's my favorite out of the original like Digimon series, so I would kind of want them to leave that be and not try to do the story over. Which is funny because we're actually going to talk about that a little later on down the line. With that being said, I did notice, because I still check the analytics on this podcast, I noticed that the podcast was still getting plays. Now, mind you, it wasn't getting like an exponential amount of plays, but the podcast was still gaining traction. It's already been dead for a year, and I really had no plans of trying to resurrect it, but now, since I'm on a content creation kick, if you will, I don't want it to die. And I still like Digimon. It's not like I don't like Digimon at all. I still really love Digimon. Well, what should I do with the podcast? The original series exists. The movies exist. There are other things in Digimon that you've noticed that you could also talk about. It's not like the Digimon podcast has to initially just be about the show itself. You can talk about other aspects of it. That's the direction I plan on going on. In today's podcast, we are actually going to be discussing something that honestly has never crossed my mind until just doing random Google searches. For today's episode, it's actually about O2, and it's a question that was posed by one Seamus Kelly from the website Den of Geek. And one of the articles he wrote late last year, it was asking the question, why wasn't TK the leader of Digimon Season 2? And I read the article and they gave really great points about what could have happened rather than it just somehow skipping over one of the people who was already in the initial Digidestined and who has no experience with the digital world and just takes the leadership role. So I thought that was interesting, and I thought that I would also contribute to this. Now, I took the liberty of rewriting the first episode of O2 just to see how that would play out if rather than Davis, or yeah, I think Davis, or I think we're just going to be using the dub names for this podcast. What happens if Davis hadn't become the de facto leader of the kids in O2? Again, O2 is my favorite series. I was overall pretty content with O2. There were a couple of things that, of course, again, O2 is not perfect, and I can understand why certain people would not like O2. Some of the plot points were glossed over and very rushed. The ending was another point of contention for me too, because I was just like, wow, we really did a time skip and now all the kids have kids. One of the things that I didn't really like about O2 is that everybody was given a Digimon at the end. That kind of takes away the special part of Digimon. I understand, seems like the writers really wanted to go for a, anybody could be a Digidestined. And I do appreciate that. For the longest time, I wished that I could be actually a Digidestined. Like, I actually prayed to be a Digidestined. But I also think because they were the chosen children, I feel like giving everybody a Digimon for every kid to be a chosen child just kind of diminished that specialness. And of course, I have talked about this in previous episodes. The addition of Yoli and Cody were also sore points for me. I was fine with it back in when I was little, when I was watching it. I was just like, oh, you new characters. But we're watching it a couple of times as an adult. I was just like, dang, Yoli and Cody were annoying. I was like that with Davis at first, but it seems like the opposite has happened with me with Davis, where rather than disliking his character more, I like his character a lot more than I did as a kid. It's kind of like how with the Cartoon Network show Ed, Edd n Eddy, I was more of a Double D fan than the other two, but as I grew up and when I rewatched some of the episodes of the series, I found myself liking Ed more than I liked Double D, but it's still fuck Eddie all day. Eddie was trash. So with the addition of these new characters, I think what the writers were trying to do is they were trying to I feel like they were trying to keep the series fresh. The ending of O1 left it pretty open-ended for what could happen afterwards, and we learn later on in O2 that a lot of stuff happened where they actually had to come back to the digital world and they had to give up the power of their crest in order to free the Digimon sovereigns. And I kind of wish that we kind of got that in O2 as well. Maybe that could have been a precursor to everything. Maybe a bridge between O1 and O2 is seeing the kids come back. The initial chosen, well, they're not really the initial chosen children, because apparently, again, they mentioned that in the first series there was another group of kids before the actual Digidestined in the first season that came there, and I really would like to see that animated one day. Like, that's a project they should definitely take on, is just give us the original Digidestined. But yeah, where was I at? Oh yeah, them adding new characters. They were trying to keep it not only interesting, but I also feel like they're bringing in the new characters. We're trying to bring in also a new audience who were like, okay, well, since we already know these characters, why don't we just bring in more characters so, there's more people to identify with, and, merchandising and stuff like that. And we could use the smaller kids and just reintegrate them into there, and then we could just have the older kids still be there, but just play a smaller role. That's totally fine. So I guess with the new kids, they were just like, okay, well, we could also have a new leader, because the iconic Digimon thing is for the leader to have goggles. Maybe they just weren't thinking about, okay, we could make one of the other kids who's going to be part of the group a leader. Like, I haven't looked into any official media from that time or whether so. I don't know what exactly the writers were thinking. This is not to take away from Davis. I did like Davis as the leader. From what I remember and from what I know about the series, it seems like no one was really like a comedic relief character. And I feel like O2 did try to go out of their way to make the series a lot more lighter, even though it did have its dark moments. The first season of Digimon was pretty heavy. We had major character death, we had divorced parents, kids were infighting. A lot of stuff was going on in that first season, and I think with the second season they just wanted to make it, I guess, more kid friendly. With Davis as leader, you definitely got that because Tai was lighthearted too, but Tai knew when to get serious, and Tai had to make really difficult decisions. All of them did have to make difficult decisions. He was the first one to really try and bring in Ken into the fold, despite all of Ken's initial transgressions against the group. He was the Digimon Emperor. He was enslaving Digimon. He decided he wanted to be Dr. Frankenstein and created numerous Digimon. Took one of the main characters from the original series and tried to have them under control. It was a lot, and I feel like that was really big of him, especially since they had a quote unquote rivalry, which I will talk about later, a little later on. Davis took it upon himself to try and, since he is the leader, bring it in and against other people's wishes, bring Ken into the fold and make him feel welcome despite all of that. I also feel like Davis was a very brave person. He was a little hot-headed, just like Tai, but I also feel like that hot-headedness definitely, I feel like it was more of a benefit than a detriment to him. Of course, there are things I dislike about Davis still to this day. Him being very overly flirty and pining for Kari when she clearly does not want him at all. There is also the fact that Davis kinda is very immature. But he's a kid, so I'm not going to give that up. He is very immature. In comparison, but I guess I would take an immature leader who's actually trying to learn rather than having Cody, because Cody was super serious, and that's kind of to the detriment of his character. I know he's a kid and I know he has his own traumas and stuff like that, but he was too serious to me, and it felt like his seriousness gave off an air that he was better than everyone. And I don't want this to turn into me bashing Cody because I freaking hate Cody. But we'll move on. We will move on because I haven't even got to the meat potatoes of this thing yet. I initially thought that the passing down the passing of the torch, if you will, was more or less, I guess, based on proximity. In the first episode, it's because Tai gets a distress signal from the digital world and he's going to go and help Agumon, and Agumon cannot digivolve, find the Digi of Courage. Davis is the only one who can lift it. He gets Vmon, and then he also Digivolve, that's later on in the series, Digivolve with the armored egg or whatever, gets Flame Dramon, and I think it was more or less because, Digi Egg of Courage. Okay, I have the Crest of Courage. So by that logic, therefore, since I was the leader and I had courage, and since this boy right here had courage, had the Digi Egg of Courage, then therefore he should be the leader. And I also don't think anybody really challenged that idea that Tai should just pass the leadership down from himself to Davis. Of all people, I think everybody was just like, okay, well, now y'all have a new leader. The older kids, again, were just doing their own thing. They're in high school now, and Japanese high school is intensive, according to, I don't know why I had that accent. That Japanese high school is intensive. Joe is over here studying for medical school. Everybody else is doing their own thing. Matt is in a band, and Mimi's in America, so they can only do so much. So I think everybody was just like, okay, well, as long as we have somebody to do the job, it shouldn't be a problem, and we can help out whenever they need us. I guess we should just talk about TK in general, just to give an overview of what TK could have brought to the table as the leader if he had become leader of the Digidestined in O2. TK was one of the original 7 chosen children or Digidestined. He is Yamato or Matt's younger brother. He was the small kid with the big ass head, the blonde hair, and the green outfit. His partner Digimon was Patamon. And we see in O1, I feel like other than, well, again, a lot of all the kids went through some sort of very traumatic experience during their time in the Digi world, but I feel like it was the younger two, TK and Kari. Even though Kari came very late into the series, I feel like both of those two really got the brunt of the trauma. So initially, TK loses Patamon after their fight with Devimon. Patamon digivolves into Angemon. He defeats Devimon, but in the process, he gets reconfigured and he becomes a Digi-Egg, and he watches his partner Digimon die. It's sad. We see, too, he still carries that trauma of losing him, and Devimon, that darkness that came along with Devimon with him into O2. There's also the fact that during the last few episodes of O1, there was this big falling out between what happened in O2? What happened exactly in O1 that caused this giant rift? I think Tai, for some reason, was it? 2 instances happened. In the first instance, Tai had, after their big fight with, what's his face? The monkey Elvis impersonator Digimon. What is his name? Edamon. After Metal Greymon defeats Edamon and Tai gets thrown into the Digi world, into the real world, actually, the group splits up, and I believe TK is by himself for a hot minute because Matt goes off on the little swan boat or whatever and leaves TK alone. He feels abandoned, so that's definitely traumatic too. And then he has to deal with what's the little bowling ball Digimon. I don't know what his name is. I don't remember all these Digimon's names off the top of my head. Then later on down the line, TK has to pretty much single-handedly deal with Puppetmon, who is one of the Dark Masters, by himself. And then with that, Matt feeling slighted that TK, being in this environment, has learned how to pretty much fend for himself, leaves again and abandons him again. I don't really fault Matt for that. I guess he was just in his feelings. He wasn't gone for that long, to be quite honest. So he has a lot of stuff that he dealt with. He happens to have the most experience out of the new cast in O2, of course, other than the older children. And of course, Kari is also part of the O2 team. But again, Kari came in halfway through the series. Oh, and also kudos to them for actually integrating Kari really well into the group. She did not feel out of place at all when they did add her. Do I wish that the arc was written a little better? Yes, but I feel like they did a pretty good job of integrating her with the group and making her feel like a natural part of the team. So when it comes to leadership, I feel like TK would have been a very good leader, and he also would have brought a different dynamic to the leadership. We probably would have gotten a very great dynamic, probably cliched dynamic if we're being quite honest, if TK happened to be, like, I guess, leader, and Davis happened to be second command, because then we'd have someone who knows the dangers of the Digi world, knows what they're up against, knows for the most part what they need to do. And you have Davis, who's very, since he's comic release, he's very happy-go-lucky, flirtatious. We see that dynamic sometimes already in anime, so it could have come off as cliche, having the straight man and then the comedic relief as the dueling personalities. But I also feel like that could have been really interesting to see. TK did not feel like he was a second in command. It seems like they circumvented that. And when Ken came into the fold, he became kind of the de facto second in command, and then TK and the rest of the group were just kind of on the side showing support. What happens if TK would have been the one to bring Ken into the fold? We see in O2 TK holds no punches with Ken in numerous situations, especially during the Chimeramon situation, where, of course, he sees the Dark Ocean and he sees Devimon, and Ken is over here collecting pieces of Devimon's arms for Chimeramon. Pulls up on Ken in the little underwater base, and Ken thinks he's doing something with that little whip of his, and TK is just like, if you bout it, and he knocks his shit out.
You're nobody! Not like me! You will bow down before me!
Sorry, the floor's kind of dirty.
You will listen to me!
When you can't think of anything to say, do you always resort to fighting?
I guess.
That's your problem. You don't know when to talk and when to fight. Now's a good time to talk. On the other hand, it's also a good time to fight.
Falcon Punch!
So I feel like that would have been interesting to see, like, oh, well, after he rocks your shit and has all this animosity towards you, how TK would have handled because Ken is a Digidestined, how he would handle bringing Ken into the fold. And to be quite honest, I don't feel like the rivalry that Ken and Davis had was that strong. I think the only thing that they did in O2 really that showed that they were rivals was play a soccer match. And that was one episode, and we literally find out in that same episode that Ken was the Digimon Emperor. There was no real tension in between there. I feel like we could have been we could have gotten a lot more rivalry stuff between Ken and Davis that would have made more sense into why they happened to be compatible once Ken had joined the fold. But that's neither here nor there. It also would have been cool to see what Digivolutions we could have gotten, especially during the DNA Digivolving arc. Because if we're being quite honest, TK kind of got the brunt. TK kind of got the short end of the stick with that art, because we got Pai Ildraman. Pai Ildraman is really, really cool. We had Sylphimon, who, despite the chicken lower half, I think was also pretty cool. And then we have Shikakumon, who looks like a giant teapot. An armadillo and an angel DNA digivolving into a teapot thing, Digimon clay pot, terracotta pot, sculpture was not cool. And of course you got paired with the lamest Digidestined during that season. So I would have loved to see Angemon and, say, XVmon DNA Digivolve, or again, if Ken happened to be his partner, seeing Stingmon and Angemon. Those, I feel like we would have definitely got some really, really cool Digivolutions from that. And I also feel like if TK had been the leader, I feel like we probably would have got a lot less of the Kari rebuffing Davis's advances, because I feel like they focused mainly on that because he was the leader. And I feel like if that would have happened, it would have been a lot less prevalent throughout the series, since Davis was not the main focus. He was just the comic relief. So how would I write the first episode in order for TK to become the leader? That is the question, and that is the question I am going to answer for you right now. First episode is the introduction of the three new characters, Davis, Yoli, Cody, Vmon, in the course the Dark Spires and the Dark Rings. So this is how I would have had it go. It would essentially pretty much just run the same. It would be the first day of school. TK would meet with all the other newer kids. Tai would definitely get that distress call from the digital world from Agumon. Tai would rush there to try and help him. And then, of course, Agumon could not digivolve because of the Dark Spires. Tai would send the email to Kari, but it actually goes to Yoli. She'd relay the message, and it would go to the computer lab or whatever with Izzy, and Davis would follow. Rather than Tai finding the Digi Egg of Courage, he would either find the Digi Egg of Hope, or he would find Aurora Borealis covered stone or some sort of water source, which would be a throwback to season one and how they were able to get to the digital world initially with the Aurora Borealis being in the sky. Tai would touch it, it would send out the other three Digivices, and it would also send out the signal to change Kari and TK's Digivices, because I don't understand why initially they had to wait for their Digivices to change when they're initially part of the team, other than the fact they had to wait until get their eggs. But if they're going back and forth with the newer kids, it would make sense for them to have the newer Digivices. Of course, TK, Davis, and Kari would go into the digital world once they get the new Digivices. After they meet up with Tai and dodge all the monochromon, he would tell them about the egg slash or stone thing, and they would each try to lift it. TK would not get a chance to lift it right away because he's talking with Davis and he's trying to explain the digital world to him. And during when he's about to have his turn, Monochromon happens to just attack them. The fight happens, the group tries to fight, try to digivolve, they can't digivolve. Davis, who again knows nothing about the digital world and has no Digimon at this point, just happens to get in the way of something. Patamon and TK try to protect him, and Patamon winds up getting injured. With that injury, TK happens to get flashbacks from the previous season with Devimon and with all the other battles that they fight. He picks up Patamon and he runs into the cave. He laments about how he's still, even as he's grown, he was still not really able to protect Patamon. They have a little bonding moment. Patamon says something really cheesy and really corny about in these, children's cartoons. They're like, oh, you're my hope. You always are there to protect me. And with that, the either the pool slash rock thing glows, or the egg happens to lift up and go over to TK and he's able to activate it. So either we can have either Patamon digivolving into Angemon with the power of the pool or whatever, which for some reason allows him to do that, or we can have Pegasusmon come out and TK just has his Digi-Egg first. Or Pegasusmon or Angemon, whoever you decide to choose, will defeat Monochromon. After the defeat, Tai acknowledges TK for his courage, tries to give him the goggles so he can become the leader. He accepts the leadership role, but he doesn't take the goggles because they said he would cramp his style, because he has that Don Beckett hat and that would not work with him. And then Tai would remark like, oh, you're just like your brother or whatever, and they would laugh. And then Davis, feeling again out of place and feeling a little jealous because Kari is laughing at TK's little quip, he asks for the goggles instead, and Tai is just like, what, I don't really need these, I need a new pair anyway, and he just gives it to him just because. That way Davis can still have the goggles, and TK still becomes a leader. And yeah, that's that. I'm not going to rewrite the whole series, but then I feel like that would lead into other things that could be fixed in the series. Kari could have her own solo episode rather than them trying to shoehorn her with TK, and then Kari and TK, Cody and Yoli can still have their own little episode together. Or maybe you could put all Davis, Yoli, and Cody together in one episode and they get introduced to their Digimon. But yeah, that's how I would do it. Hopefully this all made sense, because I feel like I was rambling a lot of the time, but when I wrote it down, it made sense in my brain. Talking it out, I was just like, ooh, do I know what I'm talking about? Hopefully people will understand what I'm discussing. But TK could have been a possible great leader, and we were kind of robbed by that. Again, I don't have an issue with how O2 was written, aside from the things I listed earlier on. I don't mind Davis as a leader. He was pretty cool as a leader, but it just kind of poses the question of what if? I always like these what ifs because they just I mean, I guess that's why fan fiction and stuff exists, because people are unsatisfied with what happened, so they take it upon themselves to be like, okay, well, what if I do this and turn this continuity into this continuity? And yeah, I think it's just really cool, but I'm definitely not going to try and write a fan fiction and fix, or quote unquote fix, O2. O2 is fine with me the way it is. But yeah, it actually feels kind of good to be back doing the podcasting thing. I'm not sure when the next episode is going to come out, so I'm not going to be like, okay, next episode going to be next week or in 2 weeks. It'll probably be, hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later, and I'm not doing the whole one episode a month thing and then I disappear again for a year. Hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you happen to be a Digimon enthusiast and you happen to have a Digimon podcast, you should hit me up. I would totally be down for a collaboration. I am on Twitter. You can follow me at Not an Avid Gamer. That's NOTANAVIDGAMER on Twitter. And y'all could just DM me and be like, hey, do you want to be on this podcast? Or hey, I'd like to be on your podcast. Can we talk about this? And I'd be like, sure, just as long as it's something that I've already seen or that I'm familiar with. Because if it's anything after Frontier, I don't know anything about that shit. And I still haven't seen Try, so please don't let me. We're not going to talk about Try unless I take the time to sit down and watch all of Try. And I will catch you guys in the next episode. So with that, I bid you adieu.